Welcome to Critical Issues, Alternative Views. I'm Ron Kramer from the Department of Sociology at Western Michigan University, and I'll be the host for today's program. With me, as always, is my ideological sidekick, Don Cooney. Don is a professor in the School of Social Work at Western Michigan University, and he also is a Kalamazoo City Commissioner. We have two very special guests with us today. First of all, on my right, I'd like to introduce Shadia Kanaan, who is a member of Kalamazoo Nonviolent Opponents of War, the Kalamazoo Interfaith Coalition for Peace and Justice, and also a member of Women in Black. And Shadia, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
And we also have with us Nour Habbash, who is a student in a Quaker school in the West Bank. She's originally from Gaza, but she now lives in Ramallah. And you're going into the 8th grade, is that right, Nour? Okay. So welcome to the program. On this program, we try to address critical issues, and certainly there's no more critical issue right now than the Israeli-Palestinian situation and the current assault that's taking place on Gaza. And with every critical issue that we look at, we try to present an alternative perspective, something that you don't get in the mainstream media. And I think it's fair to say that there's an extreme bias on the part of both the United States government as well as the mainstream media in the United States against the Palestinian position. We do not ever get much of a chance to hear the Palestinian perspective. And so we're hoping that that will be provided today with our two guests. So the critical issue is the assault on Gaza, and we're hoping to present a Palestinian perspective on that. So, Shadia, let me turn to you first of all. We've had all kinds of flare-ups in Israel and Palestine in any number of years now. What's caused this latest flare-up? What's going on that's led to the current round of fighting, the current assault that's taking place on Gaza?
Okay, I think the problem with our media and our public is we always have a soundbite and we follow the latest events. We never go actually and put it in the context, in its proper context, political and historic. In this case, the real cause is the occupation, the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza since 1967. And the Palestinians trying through different channels, international legitimacy, peace initiatives, to gain their right to statehood and self-determination and ending the occupation. So any flare-up or any confrontation militarily between the two parties, Israel and few resistant factions in the West Bank, is always oppressed, with unproportional Israeli military power against the people. The last flare-up has its own context, which is actually a little more serious than the previous ones. The last flare-up has to do a lot with the Palestinian unity government that was formed just recently, like in June of this year. Hamas was under a lot of pressure in Gaza because of the blockade of the siege.
So let's back up and
Yes.
just point out. So Hamas is the legitimate representative government in Gaza,
Correct.
the Gaza Strip.
Correct.
But on the West Bank, which there's a physical separation between Gaza and the
Is
West
the
Bank,
Palestinian Authority.
the Palestinian Authority, and
Okay.
Fatah is the primary political party
Forming the government and
forming
in
the
charge,
government.
correct. Now, if we want to go back to how that happened, we can take a step back and talk about how that division happened. If you remember, in 2006, there were elections, free elections, and President Carter's Democratic, they monitored the elections, and they said that it was a very fair and democratic and honest elections that took place at that time. Hamas won by a landslide, and there were many reasons for that, namely the failure of the peace process, the failure after Oslo, and the failure because of the settlement building and the increased colonialization of the West Bank and land confiscations and so on. So the people in the West Bank and Gaza voted overwhelmingly for Hamas because they did a lot of social projects and they were more the honest the honest party, no corruption. They didn't have corruption in their government, in their organizations. So immediately Israel and the United States boycotted that government and called for the Hamas representation in that government and forming that government illegitimate. And there was a kind of like a coup d'etat, if you want to call it, a rebellion, and there was a fight actually among the Palestinians themselves, which ended up in this separation. Hamas taking hold in Gaza, and the Abbas, the Fatah group, taking hold in the West Bank. And that separation started since 2006. Now, the blockade in Gaza and the fight on Hamas, it's not a fight against Hamas, it's a fight against the Palestinian people, all of them. There is 1.8 million civilians in Gaza. They live under the most crowded conditions. It's the smallest, most condensed population anywhere in the world. And under the blockade, they were short of cleaning drinking water, and the Israelis, for any different reason, we remember the war of 2008, 2009, with cast-lead operation against the Gaza. Gaza destroyed all the electric plants, all the salination cleaning plant for the sewage. They restricted Gaza people from fishing in their own water up to a mile, while the sewage ran in the streets and still does, and in the water. And that's the only 1 mile they are allowed to fish for their daily food. Anytime they go beyond that 1 mile, the Israeli gunboats shoot at them and sometimes drowns the boats.
So Gaza has sometimes been called the largest concentration
camp in the world. That's an open prison. Now, the Hamas people, and we always say Hamas, it's not just Hamas. There is many factions in Hamas, in Gaza, fighting with Hamas, organizing with Hamas. And among them are leftists, like the UFLP, the Palestinian Liberation for Palestine, which is a leftist group. They are fighting with Hamas. There is the more extreme Islamist group, which is jihad, Islamic jihad. So it's not Hamas, but we say Hamas because that's what the media always tells us. That started the only way for the people to get their food, their construction material, their daily necessities was through tunnels built through Egypt. And there were hundreds of tunnels that the government, the Hamas government, allowed because they would tax the goods coming through the tunnels. And that's how they paid for their employees, for their system, for their... So those tunnels is what Israel is meant to right now, because they said that's where they also smuggle material to make those weapons and those rockets. So Israel in this war right now are after dismantling and shutting these tunnels, which is the lifeline for the people in Gaza. So going back to why now, we're going back to the unity government. Hamas, under the pressure and under the economic siege and no money, because no bank in the world will accept transfers of money to the people of Gaza. So, and the unity government, Hamas relinquished all its power to this unity government, to Abbas government in the West Bank, for easing the blockade. That did not happen. The blockade is still as intense. The people are still suffering. This last episode, the unity government, our Secretary of State, John Kerry's attempt at a peace resolution and shuttling diplomacy here and there, and almost failed. That Israel wants to disrupt the peace process, which it disrupted every other one. It wanted to disrupt this unity government, and it wanted to continue its policy of colonialization, settlement building, and strangling the population so that they would leave. So it's, in other words, it is a more or less a voluntary transfer of people, because people give up and they leave. So what happened is Netanyahu took advantage. The situation gave him the advantage. The kidnapping of those 3 kids in Hebron, the settlers, the Jewish settlers in Hebron. And he took advantage of that before he knew they were killed. They could have been kidnapped for a prisoner exchange, for example. He went into the West Bank into a rampage of violence. The army was inside the cities, inside homes, searching, stealing. And then he started, the army, the Israeli government started imprisoning every Hamas member and organizer in the West Bank, even those legislative members who were elected to that to council, city councils, or whatever civil government there. That and by itself, and then the burning to death alive of the Palestinian kid, Muhammad Khdair, in Jerusalem. All this caused Hamas, and the attack on its people in Gaza, they started throwing rockets in Gaza. And that was the outbreak. Netanyahu took advantage immediately, and the outbreak of this very vicious, very war that's still going on. This is week 3. And the killing goes unheeded 24 hours from the air, from the sea, and the land. All the Israeli power, military power, is launched on the people of Gaza.
Okay, so let's come back to that moment. I want to bring Nour in now. And so I think it's really important that people do understand that it is the illegal occupation that is the broader context. And, you know, people that fight over this issue all the time, history begins at different points for different people depending on their perspective. But I do think that 67 is the important starting point for the current contemporary political situation. It certainly is the point at which the legal issues that we're talking about kick in. After the 1967 war, Israel did seize territory, and under international law, that territory cannot be taken by the occupying country. And some people say, well, they won it in the war, why can't they take it and settle it and so forth? And somebody said, well, the U.S. won World War II, but we didn't, and we occupied Japan, but we didn't keep it, right? Mm-hmm. And international law does forbid keeping the occupied land forever. So 67 is an important starting point. And also in terms of any peace negotiations, often the 67 border, which is called the Green Line, I believe,
yes,
is almost always the starting point when we
Mm-hmm.
talk about a
Mm-hmm.
two-state solution and drawing a border between Israel and a Palestinian state. So I think the 67 point is important, but it also is the beginning of an illegal occupation, illegal under international law. So let's establish that. Now, Nour, I want to bring you in because I know you've been talking a little bit while you've been here in the U.S. about what your life is like under the occupation. And again, as you said, your father and was from Gaza and you lived there for a while, but now you live in the West Bank, so you've had experience in both areas probably, or at least know about the situation in Gaza. So tell us a little bit about just daily life for yourself and for other Palestinians under the occupation.
Well, soldiers aren't in streets anymore in Ramallah, where I live. They're outside if, for example, you can't see them when we're going to school, but if we want to leave to go to Nablus or, for example, Jerusalem, we can't. Mm-hmm. To Nablus, there are checkpoints that you have to go through, which might take a really long time. And to Jerusalem, you have to get a permit, which takes a really long time and might actually be denied. And so you can't visit family. For example, my family's in Gaza. I haven't seen them since 10 years, I think. But you need to get a permit. That's really, really hard to get, and I haven't gotten it since 10 years ago. And my father hasn't seen his family also.
You need a permit to go to Jerusalem, which isn't that far from Ramallah, but you also need a permit to go from the West Bank into the Gaza Strip as well. Okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure that point is clear. So you need the permits are denied, you have to go through checkpoints, even if you want to go other places in the West Bank, right? And just what are some of the other conditions of daily life for the Palestinian people under occupation?
Some people, there's sometimes bombing on checkpoints that can, people might die and get injured. And for if you actually want to leave Palestine, to go to Jordan, you have to go through the bridge, which is actually the same process as going to Gaza, but less more complicated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it takes from 5 to 7 hours.
Really? Wow. It shouldn't take that long to travel. It's a really short distance, right? But because of the delays at the checkpoint, which are very deliberate, and so it does make it a very difficult process just moving around, right? Okay. Don?
Yeah, and I'm wondering, like, the settlements, the Israelis moving into the West Bank, keep increasing. Have you seen that where there's more and more settlers moving in and less land for the Palestinians? Have you seen that?
Actually, when you're going from one city to another, when you look at the mountains, they are full of settlements that really are actually turning into small towns and are full of people. There are schools there, like parks, Israelis, and they're everywhere, and they're getting more and more every day.
And my understanding is that to travel around, there are roads which only Israelis can travel on, Palestinians can't travel on. Is that right?
It's correct. When, for example, you want to enter Jerusalem or any area there, you have to have the permit, and if you have a Palestinian ID, you cannot drive there. You need to go to a taxi or the bus, but the Israeli bus, you can't go on it. Only for people who have the Israeli ID. And so I can't go on that, or my family. So we need to take a taxi, or someone from Jerusalem has to come pick us up that has the Israeli ID.
Now, suppose someone needs to go to a hospital, and my understanding is that most of the hospitals are in the Israeli section. Is it difficult to get through the checkpoints to get to hospitals?
Well, there are some hospitals in the West Bank, but the hospitals in Jerusalem, Israel, that part, are actually much better. And so if it was a really bad condition, they would let us in, but you need to go through a really long process. But if it was something that could be treated in Ramallah, they won't let you in.
Okay, right. And what are the conditions as far as schools, as far as the streets being safe, the sanitation, all those things? How is that adequate in the West Bank or not?
Well, in the town itself, it's actually safe to go around. But if you want to leave town or go to areas that aren't like people don't really live there, it's kind of dangerous because sometimes you can go to reach to a point where you're in a highway and around you there are settlements who might shoot. If they see you, you might be a threat.
How about schools? Are the schools adequate? Are they well financed, or what about that?
Public schools aren't good at all. They start teaching English from 7th grade, and they're really weak schools that people don't really go to good colleges after it and can't go outside of Palestine to go to good schools. There's only one school that has the International Baccalaureate program, and the others are private schools with other systems.
Okay, okay.
Now we should point out in terms of, again, looking at international law as objectively as possible here, because of the occupied territory, it is illegal for Israel to continue to occupy that territory. They are not allowed to build the settlements there. The settlements, every single one of them, are illegal under international law. And in fact, the United Nations has declared that those settlements are illegal. And this remains the very enormously contentious issue because there are certain factions in Israel that believe in the notion of a greater Israel, that all of this is Israeli land and that should be occupied. And so there's a very active campaign of building settlements. It's been 14 years since I was there, but even at that point in 2000, I could see, when you would go into the West Bank on the way up to Ramallah, you could see the settlements and, the roads, the roads that the Palestinians travel on are very bad. The roads that the Israelis travel onto the settlements are very good. And even then, again, passing through the checkpoints, I had many occasions to, in fact, several times we had to get off the highway and drive around checkpoints to get back to Ramallah after we had left Ramallah when I was there. So certainly that's an aspect of daily life in the West Bank. And again, that the settlements are illegal, and this is an enormously contentious issue because the current Israeli government continues the program of building new settlements. And even the United States, I mean, I think U.S. policy is that the settlements, that they should stop building the settlements, but our governments, any number of them in recent years, have been able to really control this issue. And so there are many Israelis that want to continue to build settlements. It's illegal under international law. U.S. policy is that they should stop doing this, that it's an impediment to the peace process.
Exactly.
But our own government has been unable to do anything about that, and yet we continue to supply massive amounts of economic and financial assistance to the state of Israel while it continues its illegal policy of building these settlements. Right?
In fact, the settlement building is the biggest impediment to peace, to any peace process, because it's facts on the ground. And Israel uses the peace process as a cover to buy time to build more settlements and to confiscate more Palestinian lands. 60% of the land in Palestine, in the West Bank, has been confiscated and taken for settlements. Because the settlements are not just the settlement itself. It's the roads around it and the bypass roads around it, plus the roads that connect them to each other. There are settlements that are 40 and 50,000 people. They have universities there. So how? And that gets us into the solution of the one state or the two states.
Right.
Because how could you have a state, a Palestinian viable state, with those divided Bantustans, those little enclaves that are separated by the Israeli settlements and the bypass roads? I mean, anybody could look at a map on Google and see what the conditions look in the West Bank. It's true that the Israelis pulled out of Gaza in 2005 and dismantled the two settlements around Gaza. But we gave them money, our taxpayer money, to build more settlements in return in the West Bank. And of course, there's the blockade and the siege on Gaza. So Gaza is not free. They didn't really actually end the occupation of Gaza. So if we talk about the resolution, if Israel wants a true peace, I would talk about the Arab Initiative of 2002, which was called the Prince Abdullah Initiative, who is the king now of Saudi Arabia. That initiative was for every Arab country. They signed on it, endorsed it, all Arab countries and all Muslim countries endorsed this initiative, the peace initiative, for complete recognition of the state of Israel. And that negates the myth that the Arabs are all around it, it's the only democracy with all enemies to destroy it. I mean, that actually really proves that the lie of that myth. And then the initiative called complete recognition, complete normalization of relationship with ambassador level, economic, commercial, tourism, everything, in return, ending the Israeli occupation, implementing the multiple Security Council and United Nations resolutions calling for Israel to withdraw to the 1967 borders. And that didn't happen. And the peace process is actually, it's an act of deception that Israel follows to build facts on the ground with the settlements. And of course, the wall, we have to touch upon the wall and the humanitarian I mean, if we go to B'Tselem, which is an Israeli human rights group, they talk about what the humanitarian aspect of its effect on the Palestinian people. It's horrendous. So all these conditions and all the condemnation of the world right now, all the demonstrations here and everywhere in Europe and Arab world, is not going to make a dent in Israeli policy until we, as a country, United States, is the only country that has leverage on Israel to actually accept the peace process that our Secretary of State at the end is taking to Israel, and they find loopholes, they find not to accept it, because we have to admit one thing. Israel does not want peace. Israel, maybe it wants peace, but it doesn't want a just peace.
No. And I was very impressed recently by Professor Juan Cole from the University of Michigan had 3 maps
Yes.
about the diminishing amount of land that the Palestinians have. Before 1947, it was all Palestinian.
Yes.
And then when Israel came in and established their state, what percentage of that area was
Given to Israel under the partition plan? 55%.
55%.
45% for the Palestinian people, who were the overwhelming majority, and
Right.
land ownership
Yeah.
in Palestine. Yes.
So that was in 1947, 1948.
Yes.
But today, how much of that 45% do they still have? The
Well, the
Palestinians?
45% includes Gaza. So whatever is the West Bank is 22%, and 60% of that is settlements. There is 9% left for the Palestinians.
9%.
9%. Now, the West Bank is divided, according to Oslo Accord, to 3 areas: Area A, B, and C. And that's why Nour doesn't see soldiers in the street. Area A said that the Palestinian major population centers, the major cities, are complete security and administration to the Palestinian Authority, complete. And that's why the major cities, Ramallah, Nablus, Hebron, are, but not the land in between. That's why we have to go checkpoints from one city to the other. Area B is joint security for both Israel and Palestinian Authority. C is all ownership and administration authority is for Israel. So even that 9% is divided in those ways. And when you have a building you need to build in Area C, you can't. You can't. Here we have to talk about home demolitions and the hundreds of homes that have been demolished because the people added a roof or a room because they couldn't get a permit, a license, and their houses were demolished. And one point I want to make, just show the inhumanity of the Israeli occupation. When a house is deemed to be demolished for a violation, the bill is sent to the owner for demolishing his house, and if he wants to save paying that bill, he demolishes his own home. I mean, this is the ultimate barbarism, the ultimate. And we call it the only democracy in the Middle East.
And so, in terms of the peace process and the notion of a two-state solution, the 1967 border, the green line, is supposed to be the recognized border, but because of the continual buildup of the settlements, facts on the ground, it's making it almost impossible for there to be any kind of two-state solution settlement ultimately, because for that to work, those Israeli settlements would have to be abandoned. I mean, that would be the law, that would be the diplomatic resolution. And there are there's some room to maneuver around the green line in terms of the Israeli settlements that were there. There could be some swaps of land to allow some of those settlements, but the settlements that have been built deeper into the West Bank, those would have to be abandoned, and it's very clear that there are factions within Israel, politically powerful factions, including the Likud party, which would never agree to that. So to me it seems like it's an impossibility to construct a peace process as long as there's that commitment to those settlements, and the more of those settlements that are built, the more difficult it is to arrange for any kind of a settlement that will end up with the two-state solution that has been so often discussed over the last 30, 40
Correct.
years, right?
And the wall that's supposed to be, I mean, the International Court of Justice ruled that if Israel wants to build a wall, it should be on the 1967 border. But the wall actually infringes and zigzags into Palestinian territory. And there are the path of the wall, if it were to be built on the Green Line, is something like 350 miles. Right now it's 600 something, because it goes in and out to engulf or to include those settlements. Now, the Palestinians have offered many compromises, the Palestinian Authority, where they would allow